A Werewolf Shifter Romance. Written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Blood on Snow. The frozen lake stretched before Isadora Halvard, its surface a sheet of ice that groaned under winter's grip. At 24, she had learned to read these sounds, the warnings nature whispered to those willing to listen. 3 years of solitude in the frozen peaks had taught her what the pack never could. Survival demanded attention to details others dismissed. Her breath clouded the air as she knelt beside the fishing hole she'd carved through the ice that morning. The wind had been gentle then, barely stirring the hood of her worn cloak. Now, hours later, the sky had darkened to bruised purple. Storm clouds gathered above the mountains with ominous intent. Isadora pulled her line from the water. 2 trout hung from the hook, enough for several days if she rationed carefully. Her stomach clenched at the thought of stretching meals again. But hunger was familiar. Hunger was manageable. The alternative, returning to civilization, and the whispers that followed broken omegas, was not. Time to go, she muttered, gathering her tools. The words felt strange on her tongue. 3 years of speaking only to herself had made conversation an oddity, even internal ones. The first snowflakes began falling as she secured the fish to her belt. They were large and heavy, the kind that heralded serious storms. Isadora's wolf stirred uneasily beneath her skin, a faint presence that had always felt incomplete. Even now, after years of isolation, her wolf remained barely a whisper when it should have been a roar. She remembered the ritual. 21 years old, surrounded by her entire pack, standing in the sacred circle while moonlight bathed the clearing. Every shifter present had watched as she called her wolf forward, as she begged the creature to emerge fully and claim its place. Instead, what came was a weak, fractured thing, a wolf that flickered in and out of existence, never fully manifesting, never fully retreating. The pack elders had looked upon her with pity. The younger wolves had looked away entirely, unwilling to acknowledge such weakness among their own. Omega, they'd whispered. Broken. Isadora shook off the memory as she started back toward her cabin. The snow fell harder now, thick flakes that obscured the familiar path. She knew these woods regardless, had walked them in every season, every weather. 6 miles separated the lake from her home. She could make it in less than 2 hours, even in a storm. The wind picked up, howling through the pines. Within minutes, the gentle snowfall transformed into a blinding blizzard. Isadora pulled her hood tighter and pressed forward, each step deliberate. Panic helped no one. Her father, Halvard, had taught her that before his death 4 years ago. The memory brought the familiar ache to her chest. He'd been the pack's healer, the healer who could cure ailments that left others helpless. Respected. Valued. She'd been his assistant, learning the properties of herbs and roots, the way to set bones and stitch wounds. Then came the accident. A fall, they'd said. He'd slipped on wet stones while gathering moss near the river gorge. His body had been found at the bottom, broken beyond even his own considerable healing skills. Isadora had been 20, grieving and alone, when the pack Alpha had summoned her. Alpha Fenrir of the Ironwood territory had requested a bride, a political alliance to secure trade routes and hunting grounds. The Alpha had chosen Isadora, perhaps because she was already broken, already a disappointment. What did it matter where such a wolf was sent? Her sister Ingrid had begged her not to run. You'll die out there alone, she'd pleaded, gripping Isadora's hands the night before the wedding. Please, just do this. Just survive. But Isadora had seen the way Fenrir looked at her during the betrothal feast. Hunger and disdain mingled in his expression, the look of a man who'd been offered damaged goods, but would take them anyway. She'd fled into these mountains that same night, choosing uncertain death over certain misery. Ingrid believed her dead now. The thought twisted through Isadora's chest every time she allowed herself to remember. Her sister was 26, probably married herself by now, probably ashamed of the coward sibling who'd abandoned her to face the pack's judgment alone. A sound cut through the storm, pulling Isadora from her spiraling thoughts. Not the wind. Something else. Something alive and in pain. She stopped, turning slowly, eyes straining against the white wall of snow. There, barely visible through the blizzard, a dark shape moved. Large, four-legged. A wolf, but massive, far larger than any natural animal. A shifter, then. The wolf stumbled, legs buckling. It collapsed into the snow and went still. Isadora's breath caught. Sense screamed at her to keep walking, to reach her cabin before the storm killed her. But her feet carried her forward, drawn by something she couldn't name. As she approached, details emerged through the snowfall. Black fur, shot through with silver, matted with blood. Wounds covered the wolf's flanks, deep gashes that smelled wrong. Wolfsbane. And something else, metallic and poisonous. Silver. She knelt beside the massive creature, breath visible in rapid puffs. This close, its sheer size was overwhelming. Easily twice the mass of any shifter she'd known. An alpha, certainly. A powerful one. Who did this to you? She whispered, knowing the unconscious wolf couldn't answer. Her hand moved of its own accord, reaching toward the matted fur. The moment her fingers made contact, electricity shot through her body. Not painful, but shocking in its intensity. Power surged up her arm, through her chest, igniting something deep within. Her wolf, that weak and fractured presence, suddenly howled to life. For the first time in 3 years, Isadora felt whole. The sensation vanished the instant she pulled her hand away, leaving her gasping and confused. She touched the wolf again, and again power flooded through her, strength she'd never possessed filling her limbs. This isn't possible, she breathed. The storm intensified, wind threatening to knock her sideways. She needed to decide now, leave this wolf to die, or somehow get it to shelter. The creature had to weigh at least 3 times what she did. There was no way she could carry it. Except when she gripped the wolf's scruff, that impossible strength returned. Her muscles didn't strain. Her legs didn't buckle. She maneuvered the massive body onto her shoulders in a movement that should have been laughable, and instead felt natural. Isadora stood, the wolf's weight pressing down on her, and began walking. 6 miles. She had 6 miles to cover in a blizzard while carrying a dying alpha. Her mind screamed that she'd fail, that she'd collapse halfway and freeze to death beside this stranger. But her body disagreed. Each step came easier than the last, as if the contact with the wolf's fur channeled strength directly into her bones. Her wolf sang within her, more present than it had been since the failed ritual. Whatever this creature was, whatever power it possessed, it called to something fundamental in Isadora's nature. The journey blurred into white and cold and relentless forward motion. Her world narrowed to the next step, then the next, then the next. Time lost meaning. Distance lost meaning. Only the warmth of the wolf's body against her shoulders remained real, an anchor in the chaos. When her cabin finally emerged from the blizzard, Isadora nearly wept with relief. She shouldered through the door, dragging the wolf inside, and collapsed beside it on the floor. Her body shook from exertion and cold, but she'd done it. 6 miles through a killer storm, carrying a creature that should have been impossible to move. She forced herself upright, stripped off her soaked cloak, and turned to properly examine her unexpected guest. In the dim light from her banked fire, the wolf looked even larger. Blood stained her floor where it lay. Those wounds needed immediate attention, or this creature would die regardless of her rescue. Isadora grabbed her supplies, the herbs and tools her father had taught her to use. Her hands moved with familiar precision, cleaning wounds, packing them with poultices that would draw out poison. The wolfsbane was bad enough, but the silver mixed with it created a compound that would kill even the strongest alpha. "Who were you running from?" she asked the unconscious wolf, her voice barely audible. "And why do I feel like my life just changed forever?" The wolf's breathing was shallow, but steady. It would live, at least through the night. Whether it would thank her for the rescue or curse her for interfering remained to be seen. Outside, the blizzard howled its fury against the cabin walls, sealing them both inside. Isadora added wood to the fire and settled onto the floor beside the massive creature. Her body still thrummed with residual energy from the contact, her wolf more alert than it had been in years. Tomorrow she would have questions. Tomorrow she would demand answers. But tonight, as the storm raged and the strange wolf's chest rose and fell beneath its silver-streaked fur, Isadora allowed herself one small truth. She was no longer alone. And somehow, terrifyingly, that changed everything. Chapter 2. Fever and Firelight. The wolf did not wake on the first day. Isadora changed the poultices 3 times, her hands moving with the precision her father had drilled into her during years of training. Each time she peeled away the herb-soaked cloth, she expected to find the wounds unchanged or worsening. Instead, they looked better. Not healed, but closing faster than any injury should, especially ones contaminated with wolfsbane and silver. "That shouldn't be possible," she murmured, pressing fresh yarrow and comfrey against the deepest gash along the wolf's ribs. The mixture should have drawn out poison, yes, but the rate of healing defied natural law. She'd seen strong alphas recover from similar wounds. It took weeks, not hours. The wolf's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, each breath deep and even despite the trauma its body had endured. Isadora sat back on her heels, studying the creature in the firelight. Its fur was remarkable up close, black as a moonless night, but threaded through with silver that seemed to shimmer when the flames danced. She'd never seen coloring quite like it. Her own wolf stirred beneath her skin, pressing forward with an insistence that felt foreign. For 3 years, that presence had been barely a whisper, a ghost of what it should have been. Now it paced restlessly, focused entirely on the massive creature occupying most of her cabin floor. "What are you trying to tell me?" Isadora asked the silent animal. "Important," her wolf seemed to whisper. "He is important." The word resonated through her chest, carrying weight she didn't understand. Important how? Important to whom? She was a rejected Omega living in isolation. Nothing and no one was important to her survival except herself. Yet she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward this stranger. When she'd carried him through the blizzard, touching his fur had filled her with strength she'd never possessed. Even now, sitting beside him, she felt more whole than she had in years, as if some missing piece had finally clicked into place. The storm continued through the night and into the second day. Snow piled against the cabin walls, sealing the door shut. Isadora didn't mind. She had supplies enough for several weeks, and the forced isolation meant no unexpected visitors. Not that she received visitors anymore, but old habits of caution died hard. She spent the second day preparing more poultices and checking the wolf's wounds repeatedly. The improvement continued to astound her. By evening, several of the smaller cuts had closed completely, leaving only faint pink lines beneath the fur. The larger wounds still seeped, but even they showed remarkable progress. "Who are you?" she asked the unconscious wolf as she settled beside it for the night. The cabin was small, barely large enough for her narrow bed, a table, and the fireplace. With the massive wolf stretched across the floor, space was even more limited. She'd dragged her blankets down to sleep near the fire, telling herself it was practical. The wolf needed warmth to heal. It had nothing to do with the strange comfort she felt in its presence. She laid a hand on the wolf's shoulder, fingers sinking into thick fur. That same electric sensation sparked through her palm, traveling up her arm and into her chest, where her own wolf responded with something that felt almost like contentment. Isadora closed her eyes, letting the feeling wash over her. For the first time since her father's death, she didn't feel entirely alone. Sleep claimed her gradually, pulled under by exhaustion and the warmth of the fire. She dreamed of running through forests she'd never seen, of a voice calling her name in tones that made her heart race. The dreams felt significant, heavy with meaning she couldn't quite grasp. Dawn light filtering through the window woke her on the third morning. She opened her eyes slowly, consciousness returning in stages. The fire had burned low. She needed to add wood. Her body ached from sleeping on the hard floor. Her hand still rested on fur that was warm and solid and not fur. Isadora's eyes snapped fully open. Her hand rested on skin. Smooth, scarred skin stretched over muscle that tensed beneath her palm. She jerked back, scrambling away until her spine hit the cabin wall. Where the wolf had been, a man now lay. He was massive even in human form, easily filling the space the wolf had occupied. Broad shoulders tapered to a lean waist. Every inch of him built with the kind of strength that came from years of physical training. Scars crisscrossed his torso, old wounds that spoke of countless battles. His face, partially obscured by black hair that fell past his shoulders, was striking in its harsh beauty. A full beard covered his jaw, well kept despite his current state. Even unconscious and injured, he radiated the kind of power that made lesser wolves submit instinctively. An alpha, no question, but more than that. The aura rolling off him pressed against her senses with overwhelming force. This was no ordinary pack alpha. This was something else entirely. Isadora forced herself to breathe steadily, to think past the shock. Shifters transformed when unconscious sometimes, usually when their bodies decided the other form would heal faster. She'd read about it in her father's journals, though she'd never witnessed it personally. The fact that this man had remained a wolf for 2 days before shifting suggested the animal form had been necessary to survive the initial trauma. She grabbed a blanket and covered him, averting her eyes from his nakedness even as heat crept up her neck. 3 years of isolation hadn't completely erased her sense of propriety. Once he was covered, she moved closer, checking his wounds with clinical detachment. Or trying to. Her hands trembled slightly as she peeled back the blanket to examine the injuries that had looked so severe on the wolf. In human form, they appeared even more deadly. Deep gouges across his ribs had barely closed. Puncture wounds dotted his shoulders and back. The smell of wolfsbane still clung to his skin, mixed with that metallic tang of silver. Someone had wanted him dead. Someone had used weapons specifically designed to kill shifters. As she cleaned the wounds with fresh water, the man stirred. His breathing changed, becoming rapid and shallow. A low sound escaped his throat. Not quite a growl, but close. His head turned restlessly, dark hair falling away from his face. "No," he muttered, the word rough and barely intelligible. Won't let." Isadora froze, her cloth hovering above his chest. He was delirious, caught in fever dreams. She should stay quiet, let him work through it. But curiosity and concern warred within her. "You're safe," she said softly, the first word she'd spoken to him as a man. "Rest." His eyes snapped open, and Isadora's breath caught. They were amber, bright as the heart of a flame, and filled with a wild intensity that pinned her in place. For a moment, those eyes focused on her with perfect clarity. His lips moved, forming a word that seemed dragged from somewhere deep. "Mate." Then his eyes rolled back, and unconsciousness claimed him again. Isadora sat motionless, her heart pounding so hard she could hear blood rushing in her ears. Mate. He'd called her mate. The word resonated through her wolf, who surged forward with sudden, fierce recognition. But that was impossible. She'd never met this man before. Mate bonds didn't work that way. They required time, proximity, mutual recognition. Unless they didn't. Unless the stories she'd heard as a child were true. The ones about fated mates who recognized each other instantly, whose souls called to each other across distance and circumstance. She'd always thought those were fantasies, tales told to make young wolves dream of romance, instead of facing the reality of political matches and pack alliances. "You're delirious," she told the unconscious man firmly, as if he could hear her. "You don't know what you're saying." But her wolf disagreed vehemently, pacing and pushing against her control with unusual strength. "Mine," it seemed to say. "Ours. Protect." Over the next hours, the man's fever worsened. He thrashed weakly, muttering words that made no sense strung together, but painted a picture of betrayal and desperation. He spoke of poison and counsels, of enemies wearing friendly faces. The name Bjorn came up repeatedly, sometimes as a curse, sometimes as a plea. "Bjorn," he gasped during one particularly violent spell. "Get back. Tell them. Traitor in the—" His body convulsed, and Isadora held him down, using the blanket to keep him from injuring himself further. She pressed cool cloths to his forehead, forced water between his lips when she could, and prayed to God she'd stopped believing in years ago that he would survive. As the third day bled into the fourth, the fever finally broke. The man's thrashing subsided, his breathing evening out into true sleep rather than unconscious delirium. Isadora sagged with relief, exhaustion pulling at her bones. She'd barely slept since finding him, too afraid that if she looked away for even a moment, death would claim him. The storm outside had finally quieted, Through the window, she could see pale sunlight struggling through heavy clouds. They were still snowed in, but the worst had passed. She should feel relieved. Instead, she felt trapped in a different way. Trapped by the presence of this stranger who called her mate, who carried wounds that spoke of deadly enemies, who radiated power that made her wolf sing. "Who are you?" she whispered to the sleeping man. "And what have I brought into my home?" He didn't answer, but she hadn't expected him to. Tomorrow he might wake fully. Tomorrow she would demand answers. But tonight, as the fire crackled and the stranger's chest rose and fell with steady breath, Isadora allowed herself to wonder if perhaps she'd saved him for a reason. If perhaps, against all logic and self-preservation, he truly was exactly what he'd called her. His mate. Chapter 3. Truths and Transformations. Oryx woke to firelight dancing across rough wooden beams, and the scent of herbs he recognized from battlefield healers. His body ached with a bone-deep weariness that spoke of serious injury narrowly survived. For a moment, he simply breathed, taking inventory of wounds that should have killed him, but somehow hadn't. The cabin was small, barely large enough for basic necessities. A woman sat near the fire, her back to him, stirring something in a pot that smelled of venison and root vegetables. Chestnut hair fell in waves past her shoulders, catching copper highlights in the flames. She was slight, her shoulders narrow beneath a worn wool dress, but something about her presence filled the space. "You're awake," she said without turning, her voice quiet but steady. Oryx tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through his ribs, and he fell back with a grunt that came out more growl than human sound. "Don't move yet." She turned then, and Oryx found himself staring into gray-blue eyes that held wariness and something else he couldn't quite name. "Your wounds are barely closed. You'll tear them open." He forced himself to remain still, though every instinct screamed at him to assess his surroundings, to prepare for threats. "How long?" 4 days since I found you. 3 since you shifted." She ladled stew into a wooden bowl and approached cautiously, the way one might approach a potentially dangerous animal. "Can you sit enough to eat?" Oryx managed to prop himself against the wall, accepting the bowl with hands that trembled slightly. The weakness infuriated him, but he forced it down. Weakness invited attack, and he couldn't afford that now, not when enemies still hunted him. As he ate, she kept her distance, watching him with those careful eyes. She was younger than he'd first thought, mid-20s perhaps, with the kind of face that might have been beautiful if it didn't look so guarded. A faint scar marked her left shoulder, visible where her dress had slipped. "I'm Isadora," she said when he'd finished. "Isadora Halvard, and you are?" "Oryx." He handed back the empty bowl. "I owe you my life." "You do. No false modesty there, just simple truth." "What happened to you?" He'd known this question was coming, had prepared his answer during those brief moments of fevered consciousness. The truth was too dangerous, too complicated. She'd saved him, but that didn't mean she could be trusted with information that could topple kingdoms. "I'm an alpha," he said carefully, "from a territory south of here. I was attending a council meeting when someone poisoned the wine, wolfsbane and silver, mixed in a way that would kill slowly. He touched his ribs where the worst wounds had been. I shifted and fled before they could finish what they'd started." Isadora's eyes narrowed. "The frozen peaks are nowhere near any southern territories. How did you end up here?" "Instinct." That much was true. When you're dying and running blind, you don't choose direction. You just run. She studied him for a long moment, and Oryx had the uncomfortable feeling she could see through his careful omissions. But she didn't press, merely moved to check his wounds with hands that were surprisingly gentle despite their roughness. "These are healing faster than they should," she said, peeling back the bandage on his ribs. "Even for an alpha. I've treated serious injuries before. This should have taken weeks." Oryx looked at the injury himself and had to agree. Where there should have been raw flesh and oozing poison, he saw pink scars that looked days old rather than hours. Something about this place, about her, had accelerated his healing in ways that defied natural law. "Perhaps your herbs are better than most," he offered. "My herbs are the same ones every healer uses. She replaced the bandage with quick, efficient movements. But I'm not complaining. The faster you heal, the sooner you can leave. The words held no malice, but they stung nonetheless. Oryx's wolf snarled inside him, offended by the dismissal. This was their mate. How could she want them gone? Because she doesn't know, he reminded himself. She doesn't feel what we feel. But that was a lie. He'd seen her expression when she'd touched him as a wolf, the wonder and confusion that had flickered across her face. She felt something. She just didn't understand what it meant yet. Over the following days, as his strength returned, they fell into an uneasy coexistence. The blizzard raged on, keeping them trapped together in close quarters that forced a kind of intimacy neither seemed prepared for. Isadora told him about her life in careful, measured words that revealed more than she probably intended. She'd been rejected by her pack at 21 when her wolf failed to emerge properly during the ritual. The pain in her voice when she spoke of it made Oryx's hands clench into fists. "They called me broken," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Defective. An Omega who couldn't even shift properly wasn't worth the resources to keep." "That's not how Omegas should be treated," Oryx said, his voice harder than he'd intended. "They're essential to pack structure. I know what we're supposed to be." She cut him off. "Nurturers, peacekeepers, the heart of the pack. But that only matters if your wolf is strong enough to contribute. Mine wasn't. And after the rejection, my father died. An accident, they said. But the timing was convenient." Her jaw tightened. "Then I was promised to Alpha Fenrir of the Ironwood territory. A political match to secure trade agreements. I'd met him once. That was enough." Oryx had heard of Fenrir. A brutal alpha known for treating his pack like possessions rather than people. The thought of this woman bound to such a male made his wolf rage. "You ran," he said, "the night before the wedding. Left everything behind." She stared into the flames, including my sister. "Ingrid. She's 26 now. Probably married herself. She begged me not to go. Said I'd die out here alone." A bitter smile crossed her face. "She thinks I did die. Maybe part of me has." The pain in those words was palpable. Oryx wanted to reach for her, to offer comfort. But he sensed she wouldn't accept it. "Not yet. Does anyone from your pack know you're alive?" he asked carefully. "No. And I'd prefer to keep it that way." She met his eyes. "You know anything about the Halvard pack? Being an alpha from the south, you must hear news." Oryx's throat tightened. He knew far more than he could say, but revealing that knowledge would expose his identity, and he wasn't ready for that conversation. "Pack politics reach even into the frozen peaks," he said instead. "I've heard the name, but nothing specific about recent events." It wasn't quite a lie, more an omission. The distinction felt flimsy. On the 7th day, Oryx made a proposal that changed everything. "Let me help you," he said, as they broke their fast on dried fish and hard bread. "Your wolf isn't broken. It's suppressed. Trauma can do that, especially if the trauma happens during a vulnerable moment like the ritual." Isadora set down her cup. "What are you suggesting?" "Training. Let me see if I can coax your wolf forward properly." At her skeptical look, he continued, "What do you have to lose? If it doesn't work, you're no worse off than you are now." She considered this for a long moment. "And if it does work? If my wolf emerges fully, then you reclaim a part of yourself that was stolen." That evening, they went outside for the first time since the blizzard had begun. The storm had finally eased to gentle snowfall, and the world lay blanketed in pristine white. Oryx led her away from the cabin to a small clearing where the snow was less deep. "Close your eyes," he instructed. "Stop thinking about what happened during the ritual. Stop thinking about what they said you were. Just feel." Isadora obeyed, her breath visible in the cold air. Oryx moved behind her, close enough that his warmth touched her back, but not quite making contact. He could sense her wolf now, a frightened creature huddled deep within, convinced it wasn't strong enough to exist. "Call to her," he murmured near her ear. "Not with desperation or fear. With certainty. She's yours. She's always been yours." For long minutes, nothing happened. Then Isadora's body tensed, a gasp escaping her lips. Power rippled across her skin, visible as a shimmer in the air. Her form began to blur, bones shifting, muscles reforming. The transformation was messy at first. Painful, but it completed. Where Isadora had stood, a wolf now crouched. Smaller than Oryx's wolf form, but perfectly proportioned. With fur the same chestnut color as her hair and those striking gray-blue eyes. She looked at him, and in those eyes he saw wonder mixed with disbelief. He shifted then, letting his own wolf emerge. In this form, the mate bond sang even stronger. Undeniable and overwhelming. He approached slowly, touching his nose to hers in the traditional greeting between wolves who recognized each other as pack. "Mine," his wolf said. "Ours. Protect." After several minutes, Isadora shifted back, the transformation smoother this time. She stood naked in the snow, steam rising from her skin, and looked at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I did it," she whispered. "I actually did it." Oryx shifted as well, grabbing her cloak from where it had fallen and draping it around her shoulders before she could feel the cold. "You were never broken. Just buried." She looked up at him then, and the walls she'd kept so carefully maintained cracked just slightly. "How did you know?" "Because I've seen it before. Wolves don't fail. People do." He kept his hands on her shoulders, unable to make himself step away. "You're stronger than they gave you credit for." Something shifted in the air between them. Awareness sparked, sharp and electric. Isadora's pupils dilated, her breath catching. The mate bond pulled at them both, demanding acknowledgement, demanding acceptance. "Oryx," she said. But whatever she'd meant to say died, as he lowered his head and captured her mouth with his. The kiss ignited something primal and fierce. Isadora responded with a hunger that matched his own, her hands fisting in his hair as she pulled him closer. They barely made it back to the cabin, stumbling through the door in a tangle of limbs and discarded clothing. That night, as the fire burned low and their breathing finally slowed, Oryx held her against his chest and felt the mate bond strengthen between them. Not complete, not yet, but growing, becoming real. Isadora traced patterns on his scarred skin, her touch gentle despite the intensity they'd just shared. "This doesn't change anything," she said quietly. "When the snow melts, you'll leave. I'll stay. That's how this works." But even as she said it, Oryx felt her wolf protest, felt the connection between them pull taut at the thought of separation. She felt it too. He could see it in the way her hand stilled on his chest, fingers splaying as if to hold him in place. "We'll see," was all he said, because the truth was too complicated, and his secrets were still his own. For now, this was enough. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, wrapped in each other, and the warmth of acknowledgement neither could quite voice, they had something resembling peace, even if they both knew it couldn't last. Chapter 4. The Weight of Crowns. The blizzard broke on the 12th morning. Isadora woke to silence so profound it felt unnatural after days of howling wind. Pale sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. Beside her, Oryx stirred, his arm tightening around her waist before consciousness fully returned. They'd spent 12 days trapped together, and in that time something fundamental had shifted. The walls Isadora had built around herself had crumbled under the weight of proximity and undeniable connection. Her wolf sang contentedly whenever Oryx was near, a stark contrast to the years of silence she'd endured. But as she studied his profile in the morning light, unease coiled in her stomach. She knew so little about him, really. An alpha from a southern territory who'd been poisoned and fled north. That was the extent of his story, and it felt incomplete in ways she couldn't articulate. "The storm's passed," Oryx said, opening his eyes. Those amber depths held something she couldn't quite read. Regret, perhaps. Or resignation. "Yes." Isadora sat up, pulling the blanket around herself. "You'll be leaving soon, then." He was silent for a long moment before sitting up as well. "We need to talk. Properly." The seriousness in his tone made her pulse quicken. "About what?" "About who I really am." He ran a hand through his dark hair, the gesture almost nervous. Isadora had never seen him nervous before. "I haven't been entirely truthful with you." Cold dread settled in her chest. What does that mean? Oryx stood, pulling on his clothes with deliberate movements. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was carefully neutral. I am an alpha, that part was true. But I'm not just any alpha from some southern territory. Then what are you? The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but fear made her defensive. I'm Oryx, Alpha King of the 7 territories. I govern all shifter packs from the southern reach to the frozen peaks. Every alpha you've ever known answers to me. The world tilted. Isadora gripped the edge of the bed, her mind struggling to process what he'd just said. Alpha King. Not just a pack alpha, but the supreme authority over all shifter kind. The ruler whose word was absolute law, whose power was legendary, whose very name inspired fear and respect in equal measure. You lied to me, she whispered. I omitted, he corrected. Then grimaced. Which is a form of lying, yes. I'm sorry. Sorry? She stood, anger flooding through her veins and giving her strength. I saved your life. I nursed you back to health. I shared my body with you, and you couldn't even tell me the truth about who you were? Would you have believed me if I told you immediately? He challenged. Would you have trusted that the Alpha King himself had collapsed at your doorstep? Or would you have thought me mad? I deserved the truth, her wolf growled inside her, torn between fury at the deception and joy at discovering their mate was even more powerful than they'd sensed. You let me pour out my story while keeping yours hidden. You asked about my pack, about my sister, all while knowing things you refused to share. You're right. Oryx took a step toward her, then stopped when she backed away. You deserved honesty. But my position means my enemies are countless and ruthless. Trust doesn't come easily when every day someone plots your downfall. I'm not your enemy, Isadora said, hating how her voice cracked. No, you're not. His expression softened. You're my mate, and that makes you the most valuable target anyone could use against me. The word mate hung between them, finally spoken aloud rather than implied. Isadora wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly exposed in ways that had nothing to do with her state of undress. Tell me everything, she demanded. The real story. All of it. So he did. Oryx explained how he'd been poisoned during the Royal Council ceremony, not by external enemies, but by someone within his own court. Wolfsbane and silver mixed in a compound designed to kill slowly, to force his wolf form permanently until the poison finished its work. Valdis, his trusted counselor, was the prime suspect, though Oryx had no proof yet. Bjorn, my beta, helped me escape, Oryx continued, pacing the small cabin. He got me to the northern border before having to return and investigate. I traveled 8 days as a wolf, half dead, and guided only by instinct. He looked at her then, his amber eyes intense. That instinct led me to you. The mate bond pulled me north even though I didn't understand what I was feeling. My wolf knew where it needed to go. Isadora sat heavily on the bed, processing this information. 8 days. You traveled 8 days while poisoned with something meant to kill you. The mate bond kept me alive, he said simply. Without it, I would have died in some forest days away from here. Instead, I collapsed exactly where you would find me. Fate, she murmured. Or something close to it. Oryx crouched before her, careful not to touch, but close enough that she felt his warmth. There's more you need to know. Things about your own past. Fresh dread coiled through her stomach. What things? Your father, Halvard. He wasn't just a pack healer. Oryx's voice gentled. He was my royal healer. My confidant. One of the few wolves I trusted completely. He worked in the castle for 5 years before his death. Isadora's world spun. That's impossible. My father never left our pack. He was always there. Always. He traveled. Oryx interrupted gently. Frequently. Told your pack he was gathering rare herbs from distant locations. In truth, he was serving at my court, helping me navigate the political nightmare that is shifter governance. Memories flooded back. Her father's long absences. The way he'd return with rare ingredients no one had seen before. The private meetings with pack alphas that she'd never been allowed to attend. It all made horrible sense now. He died 4 years ago, Isadora said, her throat tight. They said it was an accident. I know. I was there when they brought me word. Oryx's jaw clenched. I never believed the accident story. Halvard was too careful, too skilled. He'd been investigating something before his death. Something about Valdis that made him suspicious. When he died so conveniently, I suspected murder. But I had no proof, and pack politics meant I couldn't push too hard without risking war. Tears burned Isadora's eyes. My father was murdered because he discovered your counselor's conspiracy? I believe so. Yes. The guilt in Oryx's expression was genuine. I'm sorry. I should have protected him better. And you never told anyone? Never sought justice? I had suspicions, not evidence. Oryx stood, resuming his pacing. Acting without proof would have torn the kingdom apart. I needed to be certain before making accusations against someone as powerful as Valdis. Isadora wiped at her eyes angrily. What else? What other revelations do you have for me? Fenrir, Oryx said quietly. The Alpha you were promised to. He died 2 years ago in a rogue ambush on the northern trade routes. That's why you were never actively hunted after your escape. He was occupied with territorial wars until his death, and after that, your pack had no political reason to search for you. Relief and guilt warred within her. Relief that she'd never have to face that particular monster. Guilt that she felt relief at someone's death. And Ingrid? She asked, her sister's name catching in her throat. My sister who thinks I'm dead? She still lives in the Halvard pack, Oryx confirmed. I don't know much beyond that. Pack politics means I can't monitor every wolf without raising suspicion. Isadora stood, needing movement to process everything. So my father was murdered by your counselor. The Alpha I was promised to died fighting rogues. And my sister grieves for me while I hide in these mountains. She laughed bitterly. What a mess. Isadora? No. She held up a hand. I need time to think. This is too much. I understand. Oryx moved to gather his few belongings. But I need you to understand something as well. I have to return to my kingdom. The conspiracy against me is still active. Valdis believes I'm dead, which gives me an advantage, but that window is closing. I need to act before he consolidates power. So go, Isadora said, though the words physically hurt to speak. The mate bond pulled at her, already protesting the impending separation. Come with me. Oryx crossed to her, taking her hands despite her earlier rejection of touch. You're my mate. I can protect you, give you the life you deserve. Your wolf is strong now. You don't have to hide anymore. I don't know you, she whispered. The man I spent these 12 days with, the one I thought I was falling for, he doesn't exist. He was a lie. He wasn't a lie. Oryx's grip tightened. Everything between us was real. My feelings, my actions, all of it was genuine. Only my title was hidden. Only your title, she repeated, pulling her hands free. You're the most powerful shifter in existence. That's not a small omission. No, it's not. He didn't try to touch her again. But it doesn't change what we are to each other. Mates don't stop being mates because circumstances are complicated. Isadora walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. I can't just leave everything and follow you into a world I know nothing about. Into danger I'm not prepared for. Then think about it. Oryx's voice came from right behind her, close but not touching. I'll send Bjorn back in 10 days. If you decide to accept this, to accept me and everything that comes with it, come with him. If not, he paused. If not, I'll understand. I'll leave you in peace. You'd do that? She turned to face him. Just walk away from your mate? I'd hate every moment of it. His smile was sad. The bond would tear at me constantly. But yes, I'd do it. Because forcing you would make me no better than Fenrir. They stood there, inches apart, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on them both. Finally, Isadora nodded. 10 days. 10 days, Oryx agreed. He left that afternoon, wrapped in furs she'd given him and carrying supplies for the journey. Isadora watched from her doorway as he disappeared into the trees, mounted on a horse that had somehow appeared at the forest edge. Royal resources, she supposed. The Alpha King didn't walk home. The moment he vanished from sight, pain lanced through her chest. The mate bond, stretched thin by distance, protested the separation with physical force. Isadora gasped, one hand pressed to her sternum where it felt like something vital was being torn away. Inside the cabin, she sank onto her bed and allowed herself to weep. For her father, murdered by conspiracy. For her sister, alone and grieving. For herself, caught between the safety of isolation and the terrifying possibility of belonging to someone again. Most of all, she wept because despite everything, despite the lies and revelations and impossibilities, she already knew what her answer would be in 10 days. Her wolf had chosen. And when a wolf chose, the human had no choice but to follow. Chapter 5. Silver and Betrayal. 3 days passed in a haze of indecision. Isadora moved through her cabin routines mechanically, fishing at the lake, tending the fire, preparing meals for one. But her mind remained trapped in the conversation with Oryx, replaying his revelations and the impossible choice he'd left her with. The mate bond ached constantly now, a hollow sensation in her chest that grew worse with each passing hour. Her wolf paced restlessly, whining for the connection they'd so briefly tasted. 10 days suddenly felt like an eternity. She was mending a tear in her cloak when the first scent reached her. Foreign wolves. Multiple, moving with purpose through the forest toward her cabin. Isadora's heart slammed against her ribs. She set aside the cloak carefully, forcing herself to think rather than panic. Oryx had enemies. She'd saved him, nursed him, been seen with him for 12 days. Of course those enemies would come looking. The knock on her door was perfunctory, barely a warning before the wood exploded inward. 6 men filled her small cabin, all radiating the dominant energy of seasoned warriors. Mercenaries, she realized. The kind of wolves who sold their loyalty to the highest bidder. Isadora Halvard, the leader said, his voice rough as gravel. He was massive, scarred, with cold eyes that assessed her as little more than merchandise. You're coming with us. I don't think so. Isadora's wolf surged forward, stronger than it had ever been. For the first time in her life, she didn't hesitate. She shifted. The transformation came smoothly, power flooding through her as bones restructured and fur erupted across her skin. She was smaller than these males, but what she lacked in size she made up for in speed and desperation. The first mercenary who reached for her lost 3 fingers to her teeth. The second took claws across his face that would scar even after healing. Isadora fought with everything she'd learned from years of survival, every lesson her father had ever taught about finding weak points and exploiting them. But 6 against 1 was mathematics even courage couldn't overcome. When hands grabbed her hind legs and yanked, she went down hard. Silver chains materialized from somewhere, wrapping around her throat and forcing her back to human form with agonizing efficiency. "Feisty little thing," the leader commented, pressing his boot against her spine to keep her pinned. Valdis said she was broken. This one's got teeth. Silver burned where it touched her skin. Isadora gasped, her newly awakened wolf screaming in protest as the metal sapped her strength. They hauled her upright, securing chains around her wrists and ankles with brutal efficiency. "What do you want?" she managed through gritted teeth. "You, obviously." The leader grabbed her jaw, forcing her to meet his eyes. "The Alpha King's mate, worth more than gold to the right buyer." Ice flooded her veins. They knew. Somehow, impossibly, they knew what she was to Oryx. "I'm nobody's mate," she spat. "You have the wrong woman." "Do we?" He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Valdis has spies everywhere. The moment that bastard king crawled into the frozen peaks half dead, we knew. The moment you carried him home and played healer, we knew." He released her jaw roughly. "And the moment he left here 3 days ago looking like a lovesick pup, we definitely knew." They dragged her outside, where horses waited in the trees. One of the injured mercenaries shot her a venomous look as he wrapped his mangled hand. "Bitch took my fingers. Should have been faster," the leader said without sympathy. He lifted Isadora onto a horse, securing her chains to the saddle with practiced movements. "We ride hard. 6 days to the capital. 6 days." Isadora's mind raced. 6 days of travel meant Oryx was already there, or would be soon. 7 days remained until he'd promised to send Bjorn for her answer. These mercenaries would deliver her to Valdis before that deadline arrived. The journey began at a punishing pace. The silver chains made shifting impossible, stealing her strength and leaving her vulnerable in ways she'd never experienced. Every jolt of the horse sent pain lancing through her wrists, where the metal bit into flesh. But worse than the physical pain was the hollow ache of the mate bond, stretched impossibly thin by distance and obstruction. Isadora tried reaching for Oryx through that connection, pushing desperate thoughts across the invisible thread that tied them together. Nothing. Or almost nothing. She felt a flicker of something, a distant acknowledgement, but the silver wrapped around her blocked most of the signal. All she could transmit was fear and pain. No words, no location, no context. Just raw emotion screaming into the void. Did he feel it? Did he know she was in danger? Or did he simply sense her distress and attribute it to their separation? On the second day, one of the mercenaries rode close beside her. He was younger than the others, with a loose tongue loosened further by boredom and alcohol from his water skin. "Never thought I'd be transporting the Alpha King's mate," he said conversationally. "Valdis is paying triple rates for this job." "Why does he want me?" Isadora asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Leverage. The mercenary took another drink. "Kill a mate, you kill the Alpha's strength. Mate bonds aren't just romantic nonsense. They're power conduits. Break one half of the bond permanently, the other half becomes weak. Vulnerable." He grinned. "Valdis plans to force your king to abdicate publicly in exchange for your life. Then he'll kill you anyway, weaken the bastard, and take the throne himself." Isadora's blood ran cold. Not just her life at stake, but Oryx's power, his throne, everything he was responsible for. "That's treason," she said quietly. "That's politics." The mercenary shrugged. "Valdis has support. 2 territorial alphas have already pledged their forces. When the Alpha King falls, they'll be rewarded with expanded territories and trade rights. 2 territorial alphas conspiring with Valdis. The conspiracy ran deeper than even Oryx had suspected. Her father had died trying to expose this corruption, and now Isadora found herself trapped in the center of it. On the 4th day, the leader rode back to check on his captive. "You're holding up better than expected," he observed. "Most Omegas would be broken by now." "I'm not most Omegas." "No, you're not." He studied her with something almost resembling respect. "Valdis said you were from the Halvard pack. That true?" Isadora's throat tightened. "It was. Long ago." "Then you might find this interesting." The leader's smile turned cruel. "Your sister sends her regards." The world tilted. "What?" "Ingrid Halvard. Now Ingrid Thornbrook, Luna to Alpha Gregor of the Eastern Reach. One of Valdis's co-conspirators." He watched her reaction with obvious pleasure. "She's been quite helpful, actually. Told us all about your little coward's flight 3 years ago. How you abandoned her to face the pack's judgment alone. How she always knew you were weak." Isadora couldn't breathe. Ingrid. Her sister. The one she'd mourned. The one she'd felt guilty about leaving. Was married to one of the traitors. Voluntarily. By choice. "You're lying," she whispered. "Why would I lie? We'll reach the capital in 2 days. You'll see for yourself when she attends your execution." He spurred his horse forward, leaving Isadora reeling. That night, chained to a tree while the mercenaries made camp, Isadora closed her eyes and tried one more time to reach Oryx through the mate bond. The silver dampened everything, but she pushed harder than before, ignoring the pain it caused. She felt him then, just for a moment, a flash of recognition, of desperate concern. He knew something was wrong, but could he find her? Did he even know where to look? "I'm here," she thought desperately. "I'm coming. I chose you. Please find me." Whether the message reached him or not, she couldn't tell. The bond flickered and faded, leaving her alone with her captors and the terrible knowledge of her sister's betrayal. 2 days remained until they reached the capital. 2 days until Valdis would force Oryx into an impossible choice. 2 days to figure out how to survive what was coming. Isadora stared up at the stars through the forest canopy and made a promise to herself. If she got out of this alive, If by some miracle she survived the conspiracy that had already claimed her father's life, she would make sure every traitor paid for what they'd done, including, if necessary, her own sister. The wolf inside her, no longer weak or broken, growled its agreement. Chapter 6. Fire and Silver Light. The capital rose before them on the 6th day, a sprawling fortress city carved into mountainside stone. Isadora had never seen anything so massive, so imposing. Black towers pierced the sky, their peaks disappearing into low clouds. Even from a distance, she could feel the concentrated power emanating from within those walls. Hundreds of shifters, maybe thousands, all gathered in one place. The mercenaries dragged her through streets crowded with merchants and soldiers, none of whom spared a second glance at the chained woman on horseback. In a city this size, misery was commonplace enough to be invisible. The castle itself was a monument to dominance. Massive gates opened into a courtyard large enough to hold an entire village. Guards lined the walls, their eyes tracking every movement with predatory focus. Isadora's wolf whimpered beneath her skin, overwhelmed by the sheer concentration of dominant energy pressing down from all directions. They hauled her off the horse and through corridors of polished stone, past tapestries depicting ancient battles and conquered territories. The silver chains bit into her wrists with every step, but she forced herself to walk with her head high. Whatever happened next, she would face it on her feet. The throne room doors swung open, revealing a space so vast it took her breath away. Columns soared to a ceiling lost in shadows. Torches blazed in iron sconces, casting dancing light across stone floors worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. And at the far end, raised on a dais, sat a single throne of black wood and silver inlay. The man occupying it was older than Oryx, perhaps in his 50s, with silver threading through dark hair and cold eyes that assessed her with the precision of a merchant evaluating livestock. Valdis. It had to be. The Alpha King's whore, he announced to the assembled court, his voice carrying effortlessly through the massive space. Captured in the frozen peaks, where she seduced our beloved king during his moment of weakness. Murmurs rippled through the gathered wolves. Isadora counted at least 50 present, all dressed in the finery of nobility, or the leather of warriors. Power radiated from many of them. Alphas from various territories gathered to witness whatever spectacle Valdis had planned. "I am no one's whore," Isadora said clearly, proud that her voice didn't shake. "I saved a dying wolf from the snow, that's all." Valdis smiled, the expression holding no warmth. "Is that what you call it? How convenient that the wolf you saved happened to be the most powerful shifter in existence. How fortunate that he spent 12 days in your isolated cabin with no witnesses to contradict whatever poison you dripped in his ears." "I poisoned no one." Isadora met his eyes directly, refusing to cower. But someone did. Someone who knew exactly what mixture of wolfsbane and silver would kill an Alpha King slowly enough for him to escape. Someone who had access to the Royal Council's wine. The room went utterly silent. Valdis's smile froze, then twisted into something uglier. "Careful, girl. Accusations against the acting regent require proof you don't possess." "Acting regent?" Isadora's laugh was sharp. "Is that what you're calling yourself now that you think Oryx is dead? The king is—" Valdis began, but a voice cut through the throne room with undeniable authority. "The king is very much alive." Every head turned. Oryx stood in the doorway, flanked by a dozen armed wolves. He was dressed for battle, leather and steel replacing the simple clothes he'd worn at her cabin. His beard was freshly trimmed, his black hair pulled back, and his amber eyes blazed with barely contained rage. He looked every inch the warrior king, and the power rolling off him made several lesser wolves drop to their knees instinctively. Isadora's heart slammed against her ribs. He'd come. Despite everything, despite the danger, he'd come for her. "Oryx." Valdis rose slowly from the throne. "We thought you dead. This is a joyous occasion. Save your lies." Oryx descended into the throne room, his wolves fanning out behind him. Isadora recognized the largest, a sandy-haired man with warrior scars and shrewd eyes. Bjorn, the beta who'd helped Oryx escape. I know what you did. I know about the poison. I know about the conspiracy. You know nothing. Valdis's facade cracked, revealing desperation beneath. You have no proof of anything. I have enough. Oryx's gaze found Isadora across the room, and something in his expression softened fractionally before hardening again. Release her. Now. I think not. Valdis snapped his fingers. More wolves emerged from side doors, armed and ready. You see, my king, you've walked into a trap. You care for this broken Omega. You'd do anything to protect her. So here's my offer. Abdicate the throne publicly. Name me your successor, and I'll let her live. No deal. Oryx's hand moved to the sword at his hip. Let her go, or I'll take her by force. Valdis laughed. You're outnumbered. My wolves are loyal. They'll cut you down before you reach the dais. Your wolves? Bjorn's voice carried clearly. Look again, traitor. As if choreographed, half of Valdis's supposed supporters turned, weapons now aimed at their former allies rather than at Oryx. The throne room exploded into chaos. Steel rang against steel. Wolves shifted mid-leap, fur and fangs replacing human flesh in heartbeats. Isadora tried to move, but the silver chains held her in place, forcing her to watch helplessly as violence erupted around her. Oryx fought his way toward her, cutting through opponents with brutal efficiency. She'd seen him weak and fevered, vulnerable and honest. This was something else entirely. This was the Alpha King in his element, a warrior who'd earned his throne through strength and cunning. The girl! Valdis shrieked. Kill the girl! A wolf broke from the melee, charging straight for Isadora. She tried to shift, tried to defend herself, but the silver blocked everything. The wolf's jaws opened wide, going for her throat. Then Oryx was there, intercepting the attack, ripping the enemy wolf's throat out with savage precision. He shifted back to human, blood staining his hands and chest, and began working at Isadora's chains. I've got you, he said, his voice rough. I've got you. I should have sent Bjorn sooner. I felt your fear through the bond but couldn't pinpoint where. I'm sorry. Behind you! Isadora screamed. Oryx spun, but not fast enough. Valdis's blade caught him across the ribs, opening a deep gash that immediately began bleeding heavily. Oryx staggered, and Valdis pressed his advantage, driving the sword toward Isadora's chest. If I can't have the throne, neither can you. Time seemed to slow. Isadora saw the blade coming, saw Oryx trying to intercept, but too injured to move fast enough. Saw her own death reflected in polished steel. The sword plunged into her abdomen, punching through flesh and muscle with agonizing precision. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and all-consuming. She gasped, tasting copper, feeling warmth spread across her skin as blood poured from the wound. But beneath the pain, something else stirred, deep within her core, where her father's blood ran through her veins. Power awakened, not the wolf, not the shifter strength she'd so recently reclaimed. Something older, something Halvard had given her with his dying breath. Silver light erupted from Isadora's hands, so bright it illuminated every corner of the throne room. The chains holding her shattered, melting away like ice before flame. The sword in her gut glowed white-hot, forcing Valdis to release it with a scream. Isadora wrapped her hands around the blade still embedded in her flesh and pulled. It came free in a spray of blood and light. The wound beneath, mortal and gaping, began to close. Flesh knit together at impossible speed, skin sealing over muscle, until nothing remained but smooth, unbroken skin, and a dress soaked in her own blood. What is this? Valdis stumbled backward, terror replacing triumph. What are you? My father's daughter, Isadora said, and her voice carried power that made wolves cower. Halvard knew you'd killed him. He knew, and before he died, he performed a ritual. He gave me his gift, amplified it, and hid it so deep I wouldn't discover it until I needed it most. She moved toward Valdis, light still streaming from her palms. Around the room the battle had paused, all eyes on the Omega who glowed like a fallen star. You took my father, Isadora said. You tried to take my mate. You've killed innocents and betrayed your king for nothing but power. Her hands rose, silver light intensifying. No more. But before she could act, Oryx was there, his hand closed around Valdis's throat, lifting the traitor off his feet with contemptuous ease. "This death is mine," Oryx said quietly, and snapped Valdis's neck with a single brutal motion. The body crumpled to the floor. The remaining conspirators, seeing their leader fall, dropped their weapons and surrendered. The battle was over in heartbeats, the throne room suddenly still, except for the heavy breathing of survivors and the groans of the wounded. Isadora turned to Oryx, her power still crackling across her skin. He was bleeding badly, his wound deep enough to be serious even for an Alpha King. Without thinking, she pressed her glowing hands to his ribs. The light flowed from her into him, carrying healing with it. His flesh knit together beneath her palms, the gash closing as quickly as her own wound had. Around the room, injured loyalists gasped as that same healing light touched them, mending cuts and broken bones with effortless precision. When it finally faded, when the last wound was closed and the last pain eased, Isadora swayed. Oryx caught her before she could fall, holding her against his chest. "Easy," he murmured. "That took a lot out of you." "I'm fine," she lied, though exhaustion pulled at her bones. "Did we win? We won this battle." Bjorn approached, his expression grim. "But messengers just arrived. The 2 territorial alphas who backed Valdis have already mobilized their forces. We've got armies marching on the capital from both east and west." Oryx's arms tightened around Isadora. "Then we prepare for war." Chapter 7. Iron and Vows. The weeks that followed were a blur of steel and strategy. 2 territorial alphas had indeed marched their armies toward the capital, emboldened by Valdis's promises of expanded power. Alpha Gregor of the Eastern Reach and Alpha Wulfric of the Western Plains commanded nearly 3,000 wolves between them, seasoned fighters who'd been promised lands and titles for their loyalty to a dead traitor. Isadora found her place in the chaos not as a warrior, but as something more vital. Her healing gift, dormant for 24 years before awakening in that desperate moment, proved invaluable. When skirmishes broke out along the borders, she rode with Bjorn's scouts, her hands glowing silver as she mended wounds that would have claimed lives. The soldiers looked at her with awe bordering on worship. The broken Omega who'd been rejected by her pack now held the power of life in her palms. She heard their whispers, felt their reverence, and understood for the first time what her father must have experienced. To heal was to hold someone's existence in your hands and choose to preserve it. The responsibility was staggering. "You're doing well," Oryx told her one evening as they reviewed battle plans in the war room. Maps covered the table, marked with positions and supply lines. "The troops trust you. That matters more than you realize." "I'm not a Luna yet," Isadora said quietly. "I'm just the Alpha King's mate. There's a difference." "Is there?" His amber eyes held hers. "You've saved more lives in 3 weeks than some Lunas do in lifetimes. You've earned their loyalty through action, not title." The mate bond between them had strengthened daily, a constant awareness of each other's presence that both comforted and distracted. They hadn't completed the claiming yet, both too occupied with survival to focus on ceremony, but Isadora felt it pulling at her, demanding acknowledgement, demanding completion. The decisive battle came on a gray morning when both enemy armies converged on the capital simultaneously. Oryx had anticipated the coordination, positioning his forces to create a pincer movement that would trap the attackers between loyal troops and the city walls. The fighting lasted 3 days. Isadora moved through the battlefield like a spirit of mercy, silver light streaming from her hands as she touched soldier after soldier. Gaping wounds closed, broken bones knit. Exhausted warriors found new strength. She pushed herself beyond reason, beyond safety, until Bjorn physically carried her from the field when she collapsed from exhaustion. By the 3rd sunset, both enemy alphas had been captured. Their forces, seeing their leaders in chains and facing an Alpha King who commanded loyalty through strength rather than coercion, surrendered. The war was over before it truly began. The public trials were held in the throne room, every territorial alpha summoned to witness justice. Isadora stood beside Oryx's throne, no longer chained and helpless, but present as his acknowledged mate. When the guards brought in Alpha Gregor, her breath caught. Behind him, also in chains, walked Ingrid, 3 years hadn't changed her sister much. Still beautiful, still carrying herself with that careful grace that had always made Isadora feel clumsy by comparison. But there was something hard in Ingrid's expression now, something bitter that hadn't been there before. Their eyes met across the throne room. Ingrid's widened in shock, clearly not expecting to see the sister she'd believed dead. Then her expression shuddered, going carefully blank. "Ingrid Thornbrook," Oryx announced, his voice carrying easily through the assembled crowd. "Luna to the traitor Alpha Gregor. You stand accused of conspiracy against the crown and providing intelligence to our enemies. How do you answer?" "Guilty." Ingrid's voice was steady. "I married Gregor of my own will. I supported his claim. I harbor no regrets." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Isadora stepped forward, unable to remain silent. "Why?" The word came out hoarse. "You were my sister. You begged me not to leave. You said you'd be alone." "Alone?" Ingrid laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. "I was always alone, Isadora. Do you know what it was like growing up in your shadow? Poor, broken little Isadora, who couldn't shift properly. Father spent every spare moment trying to fix you, teaching you herbs and healing because you couldn't be a proper wolf. I was strong. I was everything our pack valued. But did I receive any of that attention? No. It was always you." The words hit like physical blows. Isadora had never known, never suspected. "When you ran," Ingrid continued, her chains clinking as she gestured, "I was blamed. Your failure became my shame. The pack said I should have stopped you, should have convinced you to accept your duty. They punished me for your cowardice. So you joined a conspiracy to murder the Alpha King?" Isadora's voice hardened. "You helped traitors because you were jealous?" "I joined powerful wolves who saw my worth." Ingrid's composure cracked. "Gregor offered me respect, position, the life I deserved. He promised that when Valdis took the throne, we would rule the Eastern Reach with complete autonomy. For the first time in my life, someone wanted me for who I was, not who I could never be. And now?" Isadora asked. "Was it worth it?" Ingrid's expression twisted with something ugly. "At least I didn't spend 3 years hiding in the mountains like a coward. No, you spent them plotting treason." Isadora's voice remained steady, despite the pain lancing through her chest. "I fled an abusive marriage. You chose betrayal. Those aren't equivalent." She turned to Oryx, aware that every eye in the room watched them. "I have no sister. The girl I knew died the day she chose ambition over loyalty. Do with her what you will. Isadora, please." Ingrid's voice broke, tears suddenly streaming down her face. "I'm still your sister. I'm sorry. I was angry. I wasn't thinking clearly. Please, you can't let them kill me." The manipulation was obvious, the tears calculated. Isadora recognized it because she'd seen Ingrid use the same tactics as a child to avoid punishment. "Some things never changed. Exile," Isadora said to Oryx. "Send them both beyond the frozen peaks. Let the mountains that sheltered me become their prison. Let them survive on their own, with nothing but each other and the cold." Oryx studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "So be it. Alpha Gregor and his Luna are hereby exiled beyond the northern borders. Any who give them aid or shelter will face the same fate. Take them away." As guards dragged Ingrid from the throne room, she screamed curses and pleas in equal measure. Isadora watched impassively until the doors closed, then allowed herself one shuddering breath. "Are you all right?" Oryx asked quietly. "No," she admitted. "But I will be." The claiming ceremony was held that same evening. Isadora had expected something simple, a formality to acknowledge their bond. Instead, she found herself dressed in a gown of midnight blue that made her skin glow, her hair braided with silver thread, standing before every alpha in the 7 territories. Oryx wore ceremonial armor, black steel inlaid with silver runes that caught the torchlight. He looked every inch the warrior king as he took her hand before the assembled crowd. "I claim this woman as my mate," he announced, his voice carrying power that made lesser wolves bow their heads. "Isadora Halvard, daughter of Halvard the Healer, survivor of rejection, keeper of the ancient gift." She is mine by choice and destiny both. Any who challenge this claiming challenges me. Silence. No one dared speak against the Alpha King. Do you accept? Oryx asked her, his amber eyes holding hers. I accept, Isadora said clearly. I claim you as my mate, Oryx, Alpha King of the 7 territories. I choose you freely, completely, for as long as we both live. The mate bond flared between them, visible as golden light that wrapped around their joined hands. The crowd gasped, but Isadora barely heard them. All she felt was the connection solidifying, becoming unbreakable. That night, in chambers sealed against intrusion, Oryx completed the claiming. His teeth sank into the juncture of her neck and shoulder, the bite both pain and pleasure so intense, Isadora cried out. The mate bond snapped fully into place, tying them together in ways that transcended physical connection. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Isadora traced the matching mark on Oryx's shoulder where she'd bitten him in return. No regrets? He asked softly. None, she said, and meant it. This is where I belong. Outside their chamber, guards stood witness that the claiming was complete. Inside, the Alpha King and his Luna began their life together, bound by choice and fate in equal measure. Chapter 8. Home in winter. 6 months had passed since the claiming ceremony, and the capital barely resembled the blood-stained battlefield it had been. Isadora stood at the window of her private study, watching snow fall gently over the city below. Winter had returned to the kingdom, but this time it brought peace instead of war. The changes had been gradual but profound. The Royal Council, once a gathering of only the most dominant alphas, now included representatives from every rank. 3 Omegas sat on the council, their voices heard and respected for the first time in living memory. The decision had shocked the traditionalists, but Oryx had been adamant. If my Luna can save hundreds of lives and help win a war, no one can tell me Omegas lack value, he'd declared during the first Reformed Council meeting. The argument had ended there. Isadora's healing network had spread across all 7 territories. She'd found her father's journals hidden in the castle archives, decades of research and knowledge that Halvard had painstakingly documented. Using those notes, she'd trained 50 healers in the basics of the craft, though none possessed her gift for instant regeneration. Still, they saved lives daily with herbs and skill, and that was enough. She touched her abdomen absently, feeling the slight swell that had appeared over the last few weeks. The discovery had been both thrilling and terrifying. A child, an heir to the throne, a small life that would inherit both Oryx's strength and her healing gift, if the old texts about such things could be trusted. You're thinking too loudly, Oryx said from the doorway. He'd shed his formal armor for simple leather and wool, looking more like the man she'd nursed in her cabin than the king who commanded armies. I can feel your worry through the bond. I'm not worried, Isadora lied. Liar. He crossed the room, wrapping his arms around her from behind, and placing his hands over hers on her stomach. Tell me what troubles you. Everything, she admitted. Nothing. I don't know. 6 months ago I was alone in the mountains, convinced I'd die there. Now I'm Luna to the Alpha King, carrying the heir to 7 territories, responsible for the lives of thousands. Some days I still feel like that broken Omega who couldn't shift properly. But you're not her anymore. Oryx's breath was warm against her ear. That girl died in the snow, when she chose to save a dying wolf instead of herself. The woman who took her place is stronger than she knows. Pretty words, Isadora said. But she leaned back into his embrace. True words. He turned her to face him, his amber eyes serious. You want to go back, don't you? To the cabin. She shouldn't have been surprised he knew. The mate bond made hiding emotions nearly impossible. Just for a few days. Before winter makes the journey too dangerous. Before my duties make leaving impossible. I need to see it again. To remember who I was before all this. Then we go. Oryx kissed her forehead. Tomorrow. Just you and me. Like it should have been from the start. They left at dawn with minimal escort. Just Bjorn and 2 guards, who would remain at the base of the mountain while the royal couple continued alone. The journey took 3 days by horse. Retracing the path Isadora had walked when carrying Oryx through the blizzard, the cabin looked exactly as she'd left it. Small, rough, isolated, but standing before it now, Isadora felt no shame at its simplicity. This place had kept her alive. It had sheltered her when she had nowhere else to go. It had been the site of her transformation from victim to survivor. "It's smaller than I remembered," Oryx observed, dismounting. "I can't believe you carried me 6 miles to this place." "I can't believe it either, honestly." Isadora pushed open the door, breathing in the familiar scent of wood smoke and herbs. Everything remained where she'd left it. The table, the bed, the fireplace still containing ashes from that last morning. The mate bond gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. They spent the afternoon cleaning and preparing the cabin for habitation. Oryx chopped wood while Isadora swept and aired out blankets. There was something peaceful about the simple domestic tasks, a reminder that beneath the crowns and titles, they were just two people who'd found each other in impossible circumstances. As evening fell, they sat by the fire Oryx had built, sharing dried meat and bread from their packs. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick flakes that quickly obscured the darkening forest. "Another blizzard," Isadora murmured, watching through the window. "Appropriate." Oryx pulled her closer. "This is where our story began. In a blizzard, with you defying logic and nature to save me. I didn't know what you were then. Didn't know saving you would change everything." "Would you have left me if you'd known?" he asked. Isadora considered the question seriously. "No. Even then my wolf recognized something. I couldn't have walked away any more than I could have stopped breathing." They made love that night with the tenderness of wolves who knew each other completely. Not the desperate passion of their first joining, but something deeper and more profound. Afterward, Isadora lay with her head on Oryx's chest, listening to his heartbeat and feeling their child stir faintly within her. "Tell me honestly," she said into the comfortable silence. "Do you regret it? Choosing a mate who came with so much complication? An Omega rejected by her own pack, whose sister turned traitor, whose existence nearly cost you your throne?" "Never." His answer was immediate and fierce. "You saved my life twice. Once in the snow, and once when you gave me a reason to keep fighting instead of simply surviving. Before you, I was a king, respected, feared, obeyed, but I wasn't alive. Not really. I was simply going through the motions of existence. And now? Now I have everything." His hand splayed across her stomach protectively. "A mate who challenges me. A heir on the way. A kingdom at peace. This is what I was meant for, Isadora. Not just ruling, but living." She tilted her head to kiss his jaw. "I love you. I don't think I've said that enough. You show it every day." Oryx's smile was visible even in the dim firelight. "But I like hearing it too." They spent 3 days at the cabin, cut off from the world by snow and choice. They hunted together in wolf form, their pelts contrasting beautifully against the white landscape. They talked about plans for their child, about reforms they wanted to implement, about simple dreams of a future they'd build together. On the morning of the 4th day, the storm cleared enough for travel. Isadora stood in the doorway one last time, memorizing details. The rough-hewn table where she'd treated Oryx's wounds, the bed where they'd first admitted what they meant to each other, the fireplace that had kept them both alive through 12 crucial days. "We'll come back," Oryx said, understanding her reluctance to leave. "This will always be our sanctuary. When court politics become unbearable, when the weight of crowns grows too heavy, we'll return here and remember." "Remember what?" Isadora asked. "That before we were King and Luna, we were just two broken people who saved each other." He took her hand. "Come. Our kingdom awaits. But this place will always be here." They rode down the mountain as snow continued to fall gently around them. Isadora looked back once, seeing the cabin disappear into the white, and felt no sadness. She was leaving, yes, but not fleeing. She would return, and that made all the difference. The journey back to the capital took 4 days. When they arrived, the city greeted them with celebration. Word had spread about the Luna's pregnancy, and wolves lined the streets, cheering and howling their approval. Isadora waved to them, feeling the weight of responsibility, but no longer fearing it. That night, standing on the balcony of their chambers, with Oryx's arms around her and their child growing within her, Isadora watched snow fall over the capital and thought about how far she'd come. From rejected Omega to Luna, from broken to whole, from alone to beloved. "What are you thinking?" Oryx asked. "That I'm not afraid anymore," Isadora said honestly. "Of winter, of the future, of who I am. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I belong. You are." His hands settled over her stomach where their child rested. "You're home." And he was right. Not the cabin in the mountains, not the castle with its throne and politics, but here, in his arms, with their child between them, and a kingdom to build together. This was home. This was where she belonged. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white, but Isadora no longer saw it as something to fear or survive. It was simply another season in a life that had become more than she'd ever dreamed possible. She had been broken, rejected, alone. Now she was claimed, cherished, powerful. The journey from one to the other had cost her family, innocence, and the illusion of safety, but it had given her everything that mattered. Purpose, love, and the courage to face whatever came next. Oryx pressed a kiss to her temple. "Ready to go inside, my Luna?" "Ready," Isadora said, and meant it in every possible way. Together they turned from the snowy night and walked back into their chambers, into their future, into the life they'd chosen and claimed for themselves. Behind them, winter painted the world white. Ahead, whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. And that, Isadora thought as